Hey everybody, before we get started, I've got two things. Number one, I want to thank some new podcast supporters, Darren Gamblin, Eric Judd, and Ross Harmon. These three guys signed up to support the podcast via Patreon, which is monthly support. I've got a lot of different options for support, so if you want to learn about them all, go to mountainprairie.com/support. And the second thing, which some of y'all may already know about, but if not, this fall in September of 2022, I'm going to be partnering with my friends at Ranchlands to hold a 5-day retreat at their renowned Zapata Ranch, which is a 50,000-acre bison ranch at the base of Colorado's Sangre de Cristo mountain range. And I'm calling it the Strenuous Life Retreat, which is a nod to Theodore Roosevelt's commitment to living what he called the strenuous life. So from September 18th to 23rd, 2022, we're going to do a lot of cool stuff. We're going to climb several of the 13,000-foot mountains that tower above the ranch there in the Sangres. We're going to explore Great Sand Dunes National Park on horseback. We're going to spend time with some of the West's foremost experts on conservation, regenerative agriculture, and land stewardship, and we're going to ask them a lot of questions. We're going to record live interactive podcasts with some of the fascinating team members at Ranchlands and a few other folks. We're going to discuss books in the West with like-minded, curious friends. And maybe most important, we're going to eat amazing food, read a lot of books in our downtime, go to bed early, and I'm sure we're all going to sleep very, very well. I can promise you it's going to be awesome. When I initially announced this retreat last fall on social media, to my surprise, it sold out almost immediately. But since then, Ranchlands has opened up a few additional rooms, and there is one room left. So if you're interested, you might want to move on that sooner rather than later. There's a link in the episode notes with all the information, or you can go to mountainprairie.com/strenuous. Looking forward to seeing some of y'all there in September. Thanks a lot. Hey, this is Ed Roberson, and this is the Mountain Prairie podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation, or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Chris Burkard. Chris is a prolific photographer, filmmaker, and author who's best known for diving headfirst into epic adventures, documenting them with his camera, and producing one-of-a-kind stories that resonate deeply with millions of people around the world. He's bike-packed across Iceland in the winter, scouted cold water surf breaks in British Columbia, and explored some of the lesser-known corners of the American West, just to name a few. In all of his work, Chris combines his abundant positive energy with curiosity and authenticity, which has earned him the admiration of fellow accomplished artists, well-known brands, and nearly 4 million Instagram followers. Earlier this week, Chris released his newest book titled Wayward. It's a collection of some of his best and also never-before-seen photographs from some of the most wild places on Earth. Wayward also features extensive written stories that detail his fascinating career path and the challenges, mistakes, and adventures that made him into the artist he is today. I was lucky enough to receive an advanced copy of the book, and I read it in one sitting and thoroughly enjoyed it. The photographs were obviously stunning, but what I really appreciated was Chris's willingness to share the many lessons he's learned along his professional journey. Lessons that I, and maybe you, can apply to your own creative endeavors. I was thrilled to have Chris join me again, this time for an inspiring conversation about Wayward, creativity, adventure, and fatherhood. We talked about what he's learned during the pandemic, the process of writing Wayward, and why, in this high-tech world, that he remains committed to publishing physical books. We talk about the importance of being yourself, how he overcomes self-doubt, and who he trusts to give him honest feedback. Chris also talks about how he evaluates risk. He discusses how working with Patagonia helped him to find his voice as a photographer, his passion for sharing his experiences with others, and much more. Be sure to check out the episode notes for a full list of everything we discuss and links to all the information. A huge thanks to Chris for making the time to chat with me again, especially in the midst of his busy travel schedule. And whether you're interested in beautiful photos or learning lessons from an accomplished creative, I encourage you to check out Wayward. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed. Last time we spoke, it was pretty early in the pandemic. We were all kind of stuck in our houses. I remember you were like walking around trying to escape the kids, and I think I was too. And there were like some chickens maybe in the background, and we were just trying to make do. And so I just maybe start out with how has COVID been for you and your family? I mean, how have y'all weathered the craziness over the last 2 years?
You know, it's been kind of wild. I think I don't know how to say this, but it's been an amazing couple years.
Yeah.
You know, I haven't traveled as much, obviously, and work has been, you know, financially, you know, like it hasn't been as good, but who cares about that? You know, I mean, it's been mind blowing for me to spend these incredible formative years with my kids and to sit down. I guess what I'm getting at is I made changes this year and last year, and I made a redirection in my life that I don't think would have happened had I not gained the perspective that COVID gave me. Mm-hmm. And, you know, nowadays I'm sitting here and I've been spending the last 2 years, I've been spending 3 months a year in Iceland. I got an apartment there and my wife loves it. My kids love it. I want to live there half the year. Like I had to take a really hard look at like what I was doing and evaluate, like, do I want to keep just incessantly traveling for work? And although, like, yes, it pays the bills, it's important, I've tried to carve out more of a niche for myself and just, I guess you could say, gain some perspective as to what I really want and what I want for my family. And I think the biggest thing is I want my kids to grow up understanding some of the things that I didn't understand as a kid, as a youth, right? Like I didn't know how broad the world was, and I felt like it took me traveling for 10 years, 15 years to really gain that perspective. And I want to give that, I want to offer that to them. And so it's kind of one of those things where, like, you know how it is, you can get so caught up in the doldrums of daily life.
Yep.
And in some way, like the things that you think you're good at, like work or whatever, that you forget about the perspective of like, well, if I don't put time into like raising my kids in that way, like it'll never happen. It's just not going to come to life. So I feel grateful that I had that time and that perspective and the ability to just evaluate my own career, my own life. I mean, I feel less attached to this and what I have here and more attached to like what I've tried to create for myself and again, what I've tried to create for others. I mean, that's why I made this book and I poured time into it. I was really able to like pour time into making a book because I wanted a reference guide for all of the bad mistakes I've made or all the poor decisions and I guess in some way like a way for people to learn from those in some way. So that's a long-winded answer, but it's been a really good couple of years. I would say that I feel bad when I hear the stories of people really struggling through COVID because, you know, for us it was like a time of connectivity and it still is. You know, COVID's not over. I haven't, you know, really traveled much, but I've kind of honed in on the places that I enjoy, and I've been able to like, you know, see growth in my own family that I never thought I would. So it's been an eye opener, and I think I guess I just it's not that I don't want it to end, but I don't want those lessons to go away. Right?
Sure. No, I mean, I feel like I was the same way. You know, it was a very challenging time for a whole lot of reasons, but there are so many upsides as well. And I realize that I'm very lucky and privileged that I had a job and could pay the bills and all that kind of stuff. But you started answering my next question, which was going to be, did you work on this book? Was this a book that came out of having to sit still during COVID? And then my next question was going to be, I don't picture you as the kind of guy who sits still for very long. And there's a lot of writing in this book that's very, very high quality writing. So talk to me about the process of, I mean, obviously you can crank out some of the most stunning photos anybody's ever seen, but the writing for this must have been quite a project in a lot of ways. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. And full disclosure, you know, I had this book ghostwritten by two different ghostwriters, and then my wife took a lot of work. But
nice.
Obviously the you know, when you work with a ghostwriter, what they do is they kind of take your thoughts, your ideas, and they craft it into like how the narrative structure comes to life, right? Sure. And so the most important thing was that the voice was my voice, and it came
was
through. And I appreciate that, because that's the hope, is like, I don't speak and I don't write in a formal way. And I definitely don't have I have the grammar that shows that I didn't go to college. So I think in some way I wanted this to just be relatable. I wanted it to be a conversation. I wanted it to be something where you'd sit down at a bar with somebody and tell them a story, and this is what it would sound like. But that process was challenging, you know, because there is so many stories, but it's a matter of like choosing the ones that have a lesson, I guess, that's applicable or is you can learn something from. So that's really what I tried to hone in on, is like, what are the things that really were going to be valuable to share? Like, what are the things that people might like really learn from in some ways? And that's kind of what I honed in on. It's a process, though. I mean, you know what this is like, you know, when you start to like put pen to paper and think about a book, you're like, it's almost like, where do I start and where do I begin? Those are the two most important things. The path in the beginning, in the middle is not that challenging usually. It's more about what am I kind of like, what place am I getting people to, you know, and ultimately what is that end goal? And I think that, you know, it's funny. I've been lucky in my career to do quite a few books. When I was like 22, I published my first book, which was actually by a major publisher, and I got really lucky, and there's a whole story behind that. But since then, I've learned so much about the editorial process, and I guess the thing is, I think that it brings out the best and the worst in you, meaning that you learn so much about who you are as a person, as an artist. When I look through this book, all I see are the moments I missed. All I see are the stories that I didn't recognize when I was in them, and I wish I would have shot more. I wish I would have dug deeper. You know, like that's kind of the constant, you know, that theory of like the constant gardener, you know, the person who's like wanting to constantly, you know, harvest and learn more. And I love the process of working on a book, because it starts to make you tinker, and it starts to make you really articulate and boil down, like, why do you do what you do? What are these stories? Why are you why is this one story so significant to you? And sometimes, you know, I'll be honest, and it's interesting because it's like it almost, the importance of them didn't come to life until I spoke it to somebody and told it. And I think what it takes is, just like yourself, like a good interviewer or a good ghostwriter. This is kind of to answer your question, the process, a good ghostwriter to kind of almost interview you, because in that process of going back and forth, like, I don't think I would ever be as good of a writer or as good of an author if I didn't have the back and forth, like somebody kind of probing me, asking me, well, why? Well, why? Well, what did you mean by that? Well, what? And sometimes I'm like, God, I'm telling you what I mean, but it's almost like it doesn't come to life until I really sit with it. And I'm like, well, it's because I felt this, and it's because I felt that, and it's because I cared about that, you know. So those things come to life when you write a book, and it's really meaningful, like for my own life, for my kids, you know?
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, that was one thing I really appreciated. What you said there at the beginning was that there were lessons in every chapter. And that's what I try to do on this podcast. Like, I think about myself when I was living in North Carolina and wanted to move out west. Like, if I could have listened to these interviews, it would provide some instruction for me. And I feel like your book, like, it's interesting and it's exciting and it's, you know, it's learning a lot about your personal journey, but there are also lessons that, whether you're, you know, a 50-year-old who's just getting started or somebody in high school, they can apply these lessons, which I really appreciated. One question about, not to try to dig too deep into your brain, but when you look back at your earliest work, you know, with all the experience you have now and all the success you've had, what do you think about your old work? I mean, do you look at it and you're like, oh man, I was trying pretty hard, that's all right? Or do you look back and you're like, that sucks? You know, or is this something in the middle?
I mean, it's something in the middle. It's something like, I look back with fondness.
Nice. Because
I'm like, man, that kid had, you know, he was pouring his soul into that work. Like he didn't know what he was in for. He didn't know what he was looking for. He was just out there. And, man, it almost makes me emotional talking about it, because I think back to some of those early photographs, and I'm like, I remember vividly, like, sitting on the beach with my girlfriend, my now wife of 15 years, out in Central California, like it's 2 a.m. and I'm like, babe, I'm going to learn how to shoot night exposures. Like, she's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, the Milky Way, it's out. Like, I'm going to shoot a 30-minute exposure. We're going to get the stars to move, like something stupid. And I just think like, man, there was so much purity to that process. You know, it's like you see, you know, I mean, my wife works with horses every day. She loves them. It's like you see somebody trying to like break their first colt. You know, you're like, oh man, there's some romance to that. Like there's some intimacy there. Like I look back at some of those photos and I'm like, I wish I could have appreciated that moment and that process and just a little more. Because in the beginning, all we're thinking about is this. We're all thinking about like, you know, the career, the awards, the books, the blah, blah, blah. In that moment, it was all about like trying to figure it out. And now that I think I have the photography part of it figured out, I'm trying to venture on to new things. But the purity of that original process is really freeing to me. And I think if anything, I look back with a lot of fondness and I look back with a lot of gratitude for the freedom I had to just experiment and explore. And I think it speaks to the fact that I didn't have, I had mentors, but I never had like instruction. And I think that I always really get a little bit of anxiety giving people like instruction or teaching them in some way, because I didn't have a teacher, and I really appreciated just like kind of figuring it out, you know, and that was like a real part of the process. It teaches you who you are. You know, you make a lot of mistakes. That's kind of like the theme of the book.
Yeah. One of the things, you know, obviously there's that purity and there's that, you know, looking back with fondness. But one of the things I really appreciated about the book is that you don't shy away from the challenges that you had, you know, as you were getting started. And I thought one of the chapters you get into the part about localism and how you kind of clashed up against these forces that you weren't really expecting, because you, like you said, your intentions were pure. You were living this artistic dream. You were working really hard, and then all of a sudden you bumped up against some negativity or challenges. But I loved how you talked about that. Would you mind? Because I want people to understand, like, this was not just like you hopped on a ride. I mean, this was extremely hard work, overcoming challenges to get where you are. So can you talk about that localism part?
Yeah. I mean, for those who don't understand or don't know, like, you know, if you want to be a surf photographer during the heyday of what I would consider surf photography, which was like early 2000s, that's when like the most amount of like staff photographers worked for the magazines. Like, you were going to be going to the beach and shooting, and going to the beach and shooting means that you're going to be dealing with people who don't want you there, because surfing has a really ugly side to it. And I'm not here to say whether localism is right or wrong, but I will say that when it erupts in violence and somebody's pulling a knife on you in a parking lot or waxing your window, or you're getting death threats on your phone, it's fucked. I mean, it sucks. Like, that truly was, there were moments where I was concerned for my safety and my livelihood. Like, it kept me and my wife up at night. It actually, in many ways, made me change the way I did what I did, made me change the way I operated, made me not want to shoot in California, a place that I grew up in and have lived my whole life and love. And all I ever wanted to do was celebrate this beautiful state and its waves and its culture and its people. And because there's a certain group of people that feel ownership over something, even if they aren't from there, just because they spend a lot of time there, it gives people the right to feel like they can act out in violence. And it's really a challenging thing to see. And I think that localism does have a place. I mean, the point of it, the origins of it were to keep the lineup safe, right? If you have somebody who goes out there, doesn't know what they're doing, they can get hurt, they can drown, their board can fly into somebody else's head. Like, surfing is a scary sport. And I get and understand the fact that there is an element of, there's limited resource, right? It's limited waves. It's not all the time, yada, yada, yada. I get that. But I don't think it ever gives anyone the right to act that way. So for me, being a 19, 20-year-old kid with a camera, trying to learn the ropes, the world comes at you really fast when you realize that, like, wow, I'm not welcome everywhere. And then all of a sudden, my name becomes, like, in some way tarnished by a community of people that don't want you taking photos there, but you want to celebrate these places. And so it changed the way I worked, right? I started to realize that, like, you know what, me trying to attempt to bring, like, you know, some high profile athlete from somewhere, like, that wasn't the way to go about it. You know, I admit, like, I made some mistakes there. I thought in some ways that, you know, I really realized that the exploitation of certain places is never going to be worth that strife that comes from it. And also, you want to preserve the purity of a place. And I think that what I realized the most is that if I was to approach a lot of these locations celebrating the local talent that's already there, even if they weren't as good of surfers, sometimes they were mediocre at best, but you want to tell their stories. So I became really passionate about telling their stories. And what that did is it gave me access to a lot of incredible places, a lot of incredible waves, a lot of incredible landscapes that I never would have in the past. And so everywhere I've gone since then, I've wanted to include somebody who is either from there or knows the area and tell their story. And, you know, of course, like, you know, when you're, again, 20 years old, all you're thinking of is like, I want to get the cover of the magazine and bring the highest profile dude I can to, you know, whatever. And yeah, that bit me in the ass sometimes. Sometimes it resulted in like a cover shot or a spread or whatever. It put food on the table. But I think as I got older, I realized that a lot of these people, much like in life, they're just misunderstood. Mm-hmm. And there's displaced anger because sometimes maybe they don't feel like they got their due. And so I kind of realized, well, I had the power to maybe help them get their due. And so by trying to tell those stories, it's like the California Surf Project. It's a book about surfing in all the local communities and documenting people in those local communities. And when you go somewhere unpretentiously, just, you know, with humility, like wanting to learn, wanting to know, wanting to tell a story, it's amazing what access it gives you. And that's, I think, for me as a young photographer trying to cut my way, that was like one of the big life lessons that I learned. But I will say for sure that it did push me away from shooting in California and wanting to be here, because I was like, well, I could go to Alaska where people are like so accepting and loving and like want you there because there's so few people. And I think in cold environments, you realize that like that type of localism doesn't exist because of the conditions, because people aren't willing to put themselves in those situations. So to me, I'm like, well, I'm willing, you know, I'm willing to like tough it out. I'm willing to freeze my ass off to shoot some perfect wave or, you know, document a story. And so to me, I was like, there is perfection out there. I'm going to go find it. And I'm going to go find it despite what anybody else has to say or can tell me where I can't. So I was kind of like an origin story. I like the fact that you brought that up. It's a little bit of a dark side of the sport, but it's definitely like, it's real. It's out there.
Yeah, well, I think it's important for people to see, because I feel like you are so positive and, you know, you've obviously had great success, but it's important for people to understand that it doesn't come easy no matter what. I mean, and so I thought that was important. And then another part, and I encourage people to just buy the book because it's awesome and you'll look at it forever, but there are just a few highlights that really caught my attention. And the other one, kind of in your journey to, for lack of a better term, finding your voice as a photographer, was your relationship with Patagonia and how they kind of let you do what you were just talking about just finding the story, being more of a photojournalist than a commercial photographer. And I thought it was really interesting how the photo editor there, and her name is slipping me, really kind of told you to go out and you do what you want to do. And find these the crazier the better. Can you talk about that? Yeah.
So, I mean, I remember early on when I was working for magazines, you know, Surfer Magazine and Transworld and whatnot, all of a sudden, this was like at the impetus of when Patagonia came into the surf world, right? They started making wetsuits and they had this brand lineage that was like so powerful, mountaineering and alpinism and climbing and everything. And I was like so taken by them. I'm like, oh my God, like this is the pinnacle. Like if you could work for anybody, if I could work for anybody that speaks to what I want to do, this would be the brand. And I remember forming some good relationships with a couple of the athletes there and starting to work on a couple projects. And I met one of the photo editors at Patagonia, and they had, for lack of better words, like they were kind of like the New York Times, you know, of you know, photo departments, I guess you could say, like legendary photo editors who had built the careers of, the Jimmy Chins, the Corey Riches, like everybody you can imagine has had their images come through that desk. And Jane Sievert, who was the photo editor for a good long time, I want to say 20 plus years, who just retired a couple years ago, she was just a full legend, and she took me under her wing, and she was kind of like, not my first like photographic mentor, she was the first editor that I worked with that really like took me and kind of molded me, and was like, she would sit with me and do photo edits with me and would click through the images, and she'd point out the work, and she had such a different eye. I was used to like, trying to adhere or please my photo editor at the surf magazines, right? And like what they were looking for, they wanted this and they wanted the logo and they blah, blah, blah. And Jane's like, well, where's the story? Like, what am I seeing here? Like, I don't really need an action shot for the catalog. I want a photo of like somebody cutting open a fish on the beach and their surfboards and waves in the background that says like, this is where we camped and this is where we ate and this is how gnarly it was. And she really inspired me to in some way like take a step back and kind of think about the story as a whole. And I look at some of the images that they chose, some of the images that they used over the years, and I was like, yeah, like she chose the raddest stuff. Like she curated a beautiful body of work that I didn't even recognize. And I really attribute a lot of my success to her, a lot of my personal style to her and the work that they did, because as a photo department, they were looking for photojournalism. If it happened to include action sports or it happened to include one of these things, so be it, great. But what they really wanted was good photojournalism that was created naturally. Like it wasn't a set up thing. It's like, yeah, if you go to Kamchatka, Russia and you're camping on the beach fishing, you're going to get some great moments. She wanted me to think about, how do I set up a great experience so that the photographs happen naturally? And that she really taught me about that.
So it seems like I talk to so many creative folks, and it seems like there's kind of, I love it. I mean, I just love it. I think it's so applicable, whether you're talking about business or painting or writing. There's just all these overlapping lessons that I'm obsessed with. And it seems like there's kind of this trajectory of when people get started, they copy people that they admire and they kind of want to imitate them. And then they slowly find their own voice. And I don't know, how important has it been, or how much do you feel like you've gotten more and more successful as you've just been confident in your own voice? Or do you think that's an important thing for creatives in general, just to figure out a way to be their own person? I mean, has that been an important part of your journey, kind of finding, being confident enough to be yourself?
Yeah. It's a validation thing, right? I want to talk about this in two different aspects, because you bring up some good points. There's on one side, there's the validation. And there's I would say there's real validation, like people you respect and look up to and in your life, like mentors, people that we attribute our life lessons to and learn from, et cetera, et cetera. And receiving their respect is important, especially for young males. It's really important, right? Like I grew up without a dad, so I was always seeking validation from these male figures in my life, and that's important. Like you need to find that in order to find your voice, because you're constantly like, who am I? Who am I? Like somebody tell me I'm doing good. Like give me a pat on the back, and then you get one, and then you're like, oh, okay, cool, I feel good. I mean, that's just human nature. Like anybody who doesn't seek that out is probably a psychopath.
I agree.
Or a narcissist, right? And then there's the other form of validation, which is where we find it online. We find it in these sort of unhealthy places, these sort of kind of like a metaverse type of validation, right? I'm not saying that's bad, but I'm just you need to find real validation. I think that comes oftentimes from selling your work. Could be digitally, could be online, could be physically, having your work published, having an editor give you feedback, seeing the fruits of that labor, like seeking that validation is so key to finding your voice, because you have to be the most bold, strong-willed person on earth. If you just pick up a camera and you're like, this is my style, I know it's good. I didn't know what I was shooting was good. And I think that the other part of this, which my friend Keith Lazinski, a super talented photographer, good friend of mine, who shoots a lot for Nat Geo, you should have him on the podcast.
Yeah.
He said this one time. He said, it was so interesting to me. He's like, everybody's so worried about like finding their voice and not copying someone else. But the truth of the matter is we all copy somebody at one point. Like in the beginning, we suck again. We copy somebody, we duplicate somebody, we keep sucking. And then all of a sudden we kind of like start developing our own thing. And that's okay. Like I want to give you permission, or whoever permission, to like, it's okay to copy people. It's okay to do that. And to in the process, with the intention of figuring out who you are, what's your voice, why are you doing what you're doing. But in the beginning, like, don't be so worried about doing it differently that you fail to realize that there is joy in just creating something beautiful. Like, sure. That's okay. The purity of the experience shouldn't be so wrapped up in the why. Like, I think that can come later. And it's obviously paramount for me. I mean, it's the most important thing, why. But in the beginning, it was just all about like collecting a paycheck and putting food on the table and getting stamps to my passport. And that's okay. Like, that's noble. It's okay to like just work to make a living. I think that the next evolution is to work because you're passionate about what you do.
Well, I mean, you've obviously found your voice, but one of the other things that I really enjoyed about your book is that you talk about the self-doubt that creeps in at different, like, it seems like every time you hit a new plateau, you're like, why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? Like, why are they talking to me? Like, whether it was some of your early awards, you go through a lot of it about your TED Talk when you're getting ready to give that, and you're like, why am I here? And so do you think that's
I mean, why am I here right now? You know, I think about that also. I'm like, you know, I mean, I do. I remember like the first time I did your podcast, and I was like looking at some of the guests, and I'm like, dude, these people have like had like 50 years of life experience, you know, and here I am like 34, 33-year-old kid, like trying to like share pearls of wisdom. Like, I still feel ill-equipped to give anybody advice. And so all I can really do is speak from my own experience, which sadly has mostly been from mistakes I've made and how others can maybe avoid them. But I think that in my mind, I don't really like this idea of like, oh, imposter syndrome. Like, we're always imposters. Yeah. Like, we're always imposters. I woke up this morning a dad, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I've been a dad for 10 years now. I literally have no idea what I'm doing. Every single day I wake up and I'm like, you know, I should probably like teach my son a good lesson today. I should probably like be a good example. I should probably like, you know, tell him I love him. You know, like I'm figuring it out. And every day I'm figuring out how to be a boss, how to be a husband, how to be a director, how to be a photographer. Like, imposter syndrome is something we live with. We wake up every day choosing to do our very best at the kind of responsibilities that have been granted to us. And I think it's healthy. I think it's healthy to acknowledge that. Like, I don't think that we need to like, you know, pump ourselves up and like, you know, be like, I've got it all figured out, you know, like I got to walk into this room, like, and guide the room. I think that, I think I've always just led with a little bit of, self, you know, deprecation, and tried to like, be like, hey, I'm just figuring it out. And I think people have, respected me for that. I've found, and I've made a lot of friends that way, you know?
Well, I don't think anybody likes an arrogant person. I mean, I can't. Maybe other arrogant people like it because then they can have a competition with them and see who's the alpha or whatever. But I feel like there's just something to be said for being humble. And who in your life, I probably know the answer to this because I bet it's the same as my answer, but who in your life will check you and keep you in check? Like, if you ever get a little bit proud of yourself, like we all do, are there any people you can trust to just be like?
I mean, my wife for sure, but also like, you know, which is the common one, but my kids are good with that, you know, like they do it in a way that's not like, Dad, you're being a dick. You know, it's not like that. It's more like they remind you of what's important. And I'll tell you one thing, there's being put in check by like your friends or your colleagues or whatever it is. And then there's kind of being reminded of what's important. And I would say that I luckily, I don't think there's been a moment where any of my like staff have been like, dude, you sound like a douchebag. I haven't had that happen, luckily. But there are those moments where like you're reminded of what's important in life. And those are the moments that I break down. I'm like, holy like, what am I doing? Like, why have I been gone from home for so long? Like, do I really think work is this important? Do I really think that shooting some photo or working on some film is like more important than like my basic needs as a human? Like, you know, whatever it is. So I think that those reminders, they come in sometimes the oddest of places.
Sure.
And I you know, I don't need, you know, we don't need to get like too spiritual here, but I think if there is any space for spirituality in our lives, to me, it usually comes in those small reminders of like what is important in life and why are you doing what you're doing. And sometimes it can be as gentle as like a you know, an Icelandic breeze, you know, hitting your skin. Sometimes it's a text from a friend or whatever it is. And I think those are the moments that truly have brought me back to like what's important. Because everybody needs to get brought back to like their center, their core.
Sure. Yeah, I completely, that's very well said. You obviously are out making a living as a photographer, but you kind of double it up with these unbelievable endurance trips that you'll do. And you'll go on these, I mean, it's really a pretty awesome deal because like you can do your career photography and then you also get to do these unbelievably hard challenges that just take you deep into the pain cave. And I think soon after we recorded last time, you did your super long distance bike ride in Iceland, which was pretty hard. I mean, like the real deal. So how is it, and I ask this selfishly, as all my questions are, getting home and getting out of that single-minded, I'm here to suffer, I can handle anything, I'm going to bust my ass, and nothing matters, I'm going to finish this thing. I could die. I got like number one goal, don't die. And then you get home to what is more important, which is your family. But then there's a lot of kind of stuff that is not as life and death, at least on the surface. How do you handle that adjustment? Because that's always been extremely hard for me, kind of transitioning from really hard adventure to regular life.
Yeah, and you know it just as well as anybody. I think in some way there's something to be said for the fact that when you do get thrust back into like the chaos of daily life and the strife of like, you know, your kids being, you know, bullied at school and this is happening and blah, blah, blah. And like this person said this and like, you know, you got a lawsuit going on and blah. You're like, sometimes I think what it is when you endure those hardships, they leave a mark and you hope that mark is deep because you want to remember it. Like I go out and have those experiences because I want to remember them. And in those moments when life gets really crappy, I want to pull strength from that because I'll be like, you know what? This ain't as bad as like pushing your bike 30 miles through an Icelandic desert with the wind blowing in your face. Like it's not as bad as getting frostbite on the top of a glacier at -20. And I just try to keep a realistic perspective. Like nobody forced me to be anywhere. Like I chose to do that. That's what I call a good time because I was growing. Even if I didn't know it, I in those experiences, I was growing as a person. I think that what I've transitioned from, and everybody thinks it's so, everybody, you know, asks some iteration of these questions, but it's funny to me because to me it's all one and the same. Like I'm a constant student of growth, and I think that if anything, I look for opportunities to expand my vision of who I am, of the world, of everything. And when I say that I love telling stories, I don't think that those stories need to be limited to like me holding a camera or me, you know, directing a film. I want to like experience them too. I want to be able to do a slideshow and tell about an experience that I had and how it changed me as a person. And I think that's exactly why I do those things because I went to the depths of maybe the earth, but also who I am. And I came back with something. I came back with a story to tell. Sometimes that results in like a film or a project or whatever it is. And sometimes it comes back to me just like feeling like I can be a better dad by having something worthwhile to share with my kids and to show them that like, yes, this is where I do these things because they're fun, but I also like feel privileged and lucky to be here with you. And when things get tough, it's like it can help me be a little more centered. I think a little bit. You know what I mean? Like you can kind of tell when. I mean, I don't want to say this in like a pretentious way, but sometimes you can tell when somebody maybe hasn't dealt with like a lot of external hardship in their life because something becomes so trivial when you're like, this is not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Like we're going to weather this storm. I promise. Like we're going to get the right order from In-N-Out. It's going to be okay. Or something like really not that severe.
No, I think that's one of the main benefits of suffering in nature is that you have to really get disconnected to worry about nonsense. And I often wonder, I haven't been on any like multi-week, month-long adventures since I've had kids, but I would imagine having kids would make reentry a lot better because in my, obviously they're a lot more important than some silly mountain climbing trip. And so I think for me, I got to have a mission, and those kids are the mission. And so I don't see myself leaving on a month-long trip anytime soon.
Well, and I think it's all about that accessible adventure, right? I think for me, it's like, I don't want to be thrust into like, risk is a funny thing. You know how it goes. Like the first time the first time you go alpine climbing, you're like, oh my God, like I'm on the edge. Like everything's so, fragile right now. And then all of a sudden you do it a little more and you're like, well, no, this is like very tolerable. And if you do it to a certain degree, you feel very manageable. Mm-hmm. And, when it comes to cycling even too, like there are elements to it where I'm like, like I feel like this is when I'm choosing the right people, when I'm putting in the energy to plan, when I'm scouting it, like this is why I'm so meticulous and so calibrated when it comes to like choosing an adventure or a film or a project or a trip. It's like, I try to leave no stone unturned because I do know that the biggest and most important thing is that I come back to my family and that they know that like I spent that time, that energy, that effort to like do the extra research, go the extra mile for them, right? And you get that. And I think that I guess what I'm getting at is like the subtleties that parenting teaches you have benefited me in my overall kind of life planning and being a leader in some ways and trying to be a support to other people.
I completely agree. I often wonder, like, what the hell did I think about before I had kids? Yeah. I'm sure I was doing a lot and I thought I was really busy, but and I wouldn't trade it. Sometimes like you'll appreciate this in the worst moments of parenting, when everybody's having a fit or people won't sleep or whatever. I often think about how like on these mountain climbing trips, if somebody could come along and they could say, all right, I can remove you from this situation. Like on the coldest time when you're most miserable, they're like, I'll take you out. You'd be like, no. I mean, I'm not leaving. Like, this is awesome. Yeah. And that's how it is with parenting because it can be like in the moment, you're like, this is insane. This is crazy. But would you trade it? No. Yeah. Of course not. So
maybe for like a night.
Yeah. One night, like 12 hours.
But on it. Yeah, no, it's the truth. And I think it's like, it's amazing how we like humans have the best or worst memory ever. Like I just love how there's this ability to look back on something fondly, and in the moment it can feel like the most terrifying, scary thing in the world. And then all of a sudden you're looking back and you're like, well, that not only was that like manageable, but that taught me something. That taught me something that I couldn't have learned anywhere else. And that's, to me, like that's the most exciting thing.
I completely agree. All right. So here's another question for you. You've got so many different projects. I feel like in media, you hit almost every potential platform for media, whether it's filmmaking, photography, obviously everything that comes with social media. What is it that attracts you about old-fashioned books? Because, I've got, my wife and I used to live in Costa Rica where I used to surf a lot. When we got back, I was like very sad for surfing, and she got me your book, Distant Shores. So I've been staring at that long before we met. And I would look at it like, oh, I want to go surfing again. But books, there's just something about books that draws people back. So what is it for you when you have all these choices of things you could be putting your energy into? Why books?
That's a crazy question because I actually have a fascination with old-fashioned books. Like my wife, Bree, what she gets me for Christmas and what she gets me for my birthday is usually a first edition. Oh, nice. And I have like two first edition John Muir books, and I have oh my God, my memory sucks, but I have a bunch of first editions, some that like are worth more than I feel comfortable even saying.
Yeah.
It's, she'll seek them out, and, some of them have been signed. I've got some first edition Ansel Adams. I've got some first edition Edward Weston. And it's like really special. Like there's something, and what this is like probably the worst thing to even acknowledge, but like a lot of those books I haven't read. Mm-hmm. I haven't like opened it up and read the whole thing cover to cover. If I'm gonna read a book, I'll listen to it on a plane, on a podcast, or in an audiobook. I like to be surrounded by those stories. Like I have a library at my house. I have a library at my office. People come to my office and I'm like, take a book, like take one. I don't care. I have a killer collection of Edward Abbey and everything you can imagine. There's something to me that's comforting. Like this sounds silly because I want people to obviously buy my book and read the book because it's important, but in some ways just to own it is special. And to in some way, like we get books, we put them on a bookshelf so people can see them. Mm-hmm. Like it seems silly. Like why wouldn't we just put it in like a closet where nobody can see it? Because we want to in some way celebrate this. Like it's a lineage, and I think it shows pride in the fact that I cherish stories, mm-hmm. not just mine but other people's. Like I don't have a single one of my books on display at my house, right? Like they're at my gallery, whatever. But I want to put on display, Paul Nicklin's work and Jimmy Chin's work and Corey Rich's work and Nathan Lawrence, all my friends. To me, that is rad. Mm-hmm. Ragnar Axelsson. I want people to know, like, when people say to me, Chris, like, who inspires you? I'm like, go to my library. Like, look, check it out. Like, grab one. Mm-hmm. I take so much pride in that. I take so much pride in the idea of making something physical. And obviously, for as much as I do in the digital space, and I do love how things are moving digitally, and you can take things with you. I mean, that's so awesome because I can have a collection of books with me right here, on the road. How cool is that? And images and video. But there's something great when I'm in that space of filling up my cup, mm-hmm. like filling up my soul. I've gone on a long expedition. I come home and I sit back. The other day I was flipping through Jimmy Chin's book and I was looking at like some of his early explorations and I was like, holy shit. Like he was doing this when I was like, I don't even know, like just out of high school or something. You know what I mean? Like it just like blew my mind and it fuels me. And I really appreciate that. So that's why I pour my soul into those things. Because I want to give a piece back to that lineage that's given me so much. Like, I don't know if I ever told you this story, but my last job was at a place called Esquire News. It was a magazine store, mm-hmm. just a full old school magazine store in Pismo Beach. The sign's still on the building, and I literally used to sit there behind the counter, and to my immediate left were all the pornos, right? Like all this, and I would just like, and then in front of that was like the National Geographic Adventure, Nat Geo, Outside Magazine, yada, and I would just like grab those things and like flip through them all day, and then a random customer would come in and like, it was like the funniest thing because I grew up with that education, like that was my life. So I think in some way I'm paying homage to that. Mm-hmm. I'm also supporting artists I love. Yeah. Again, like I've never read every word in Paul Nicklin's book. I've looked at every single image. I've pored over it hundreds of times. I want to support that. And I think that that's what it means to support art and artists and to cultivate inspiration.
I think that's great. And that's the same way I think of it. And now I'm in this crazy position where people send me books for free, like your very kind publisher. This just showed up in the mail one day. I was like, this is my dream come true. And so like, dude, it'll go on the stack in my living room next to your other book and which is next to all these other artist books. And it almost puts good energy for, talking about spiritual stuff. I mean, it puts good energy into the environment and it makes me happy. So why not?
Yeah. And it's funny because I know how you are like me. You're like, sometimes I'm always like, I got to get around to reading that. I feel bad, but then sometimes I'm like, man, look what I've surrounded myself with. Like of all the investments to make in life, like what a rad thing to have books. Like how cool is that? And I think it's cool. It's great to be like reminded and pull something out and read it. And, I don't know, even be able to, read like the Dio of Jeet Kune Do one day and then read like, Boy Scout Handbook another day and then Knowles Mountaineering. Like I love having that plethora of information at my fingertips,
So one more question about your book. Why now for this book that that's really lays out the arc of your career, because like you've been at it for a long time and you've reached a great level of success, but in some ways you're just getting started. I mean, you got a long way to go. So what was it that made you think, all right, I think now is a good time to kind of write this out?
I'll tell you the honest truth. I actually started this project. It was pitched as a memoir. I was going to write a proper memoir, mostly words, and I wrote a proper memoir, 140,000 words.
Damn.
It dove deep into my relationship with my mom, my relationship with a lot of things, with life. And I sat with that and I was like, you know what? I want to save that for the right time.
Nice. Yeah.
And I want to give that 5-10 more years. But I felt like so many of those lessons were applicable. And it's funny because every book I've made has been slightly more text, slightly more story, slightly more extracted. And that's just like the arc of my personal life and my ability, my willingness to share. Because it's a process. Like nobody takes a photo with like thinking immediately like, oh, this is the story behind it, but for me, it's evolved. Nowadays there is stories. So Wayward was originally called, it was called The Hard Way Home. And that was the title of the memoir. But I changed it and I structured it and I made it a little more photocentric, made it a little more applicable to maybe the average everyday consumer of photography and somebody who wants to, again, like you said, the 50-year-old to the 15-year-old who wants to do this as a career path. I still left in a lot of personal information. I still left in a lot of personal stories, but I wanted it to still hit home on that, like you're getting a piece of who I am in my career and everything. So I felt like it was the right time. I hadn't told a lot of these stories in depth. I hadn't told a lot of these stories in this way, and I think that this is also maybe like a soft approach to like writing a memoir, because when I was approached to write a memoir, I was like, dude, what do I have to say? Again, that self-doubt. I'm like, what? Who's going to care about my story? Obviously people do. And I think this book was kind of like, let's take a step in that direction. Let's see what people think. And I'm just like so touched. I'm blown away that people even care. Like people are sharing the book and, telling me how like meaningful it is. And I'm like, well, I wrote it because I felt like my life as somebody who has experienced so much beauty and had trials along the way I would be doing a disservice to those people who have helped me and a disservice to the beauty of the world had I not shared those experiences. If I just kept it all to myself and, put it all on the Getty, like sell, it's just like, what good does that do? So, it's an exercise in really like, opening up your heart. And I also think that that's the beauty. That's like a part of why, as you asked before, like, why do you do it? Why are you doing it? It's for self-growth, that's a big part of it.
Oh yeah. I've had a ton of authors and a lot of artists on the podcast. And one thing, I feel like the ones that have reached a certain level of success, where they're known in their field as one of the top people, their work obviously speaks for itself. I mean, they're very, very, very talented. They work very, very hard. But like, for example, Hampton Sides, the historian and author, every book he writes, New York Times bestseller.
Mind blowing.
He's just amazing. But one thing he is very, very good at is he's very good at selling the product, for lack of a better word. He can go out, he can talk about this, what should be very boring history in an exciting way. I mean, he obviously writes about it, but when he's doing interviews like this, or on NPR or whatever, he makes it fun and he sells it, for lack of a better term. And I don't mean that in a slimy way. I think when people start talking about selling and creative stuff, people get confused. But I feel like you are very good. The work speaks for itself, but you're very good at getting it out there.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
And so how important, the question would have been for people to be able to sell their work, how important, but you don't like to give advice. So how important has that been for you?
No, I love to give advice. I just have apprehension around it. I mean, I've made a million, how-to videos, and I've made a million like online workshops. I even made a business of photography workshop. I think what it is I have this like kind of, devil on both shoulders kind of thing, where somebody like, one of them saying like, Chris, you've had this success. If you don't share this, you're going to lose it, and then the other one's like, don't be a pretentious asshole. You shouldn't tell anybody how to do your job. You don't even know what you're doing. Because I wake up every day and I think that I'm like, I'm a freelance photographer. I wake up every morning thinking like, wonder how I'm gonna, make a paycheck and, pay for this space. I will say this, like, I can tell you one thing. He cares about history.
Yes.
Unlike anything else. Like, he has a passion for it. This work for me, exploring the wild, remote places of the world, sharing stories, I have a deep, deep passion for that. In fact, I don't really care about shooting photographs these days. What I care more about is sitting down with somebody, or in a classroom, or at a workshop, or at a event, or at a theater, and talking about the photographs. Like, my highlights of my life are not out in the field having these intimate moments in nature. My highlights are bringing those moments back, sharing them, and seeing people become inspired so that then they go and do it themselves. And also sharing those with my kids, because I had the experience. I've been to Iceland 53 times. It doesn't get me off anymore. What gets me off is taking my kids there and seeing their face. And I mean, full disclosure, I just did a full visual podcast series, like 20-minute episodes, where I took people who have never been there for the first time, all creatives that inspire me. And I'm like, here, I'm going to take you there. I'm going to show you this place I love. And selfishly, a part of it is like, I want to relive this experience through them. I mean, that's what we're after. And so I think that in many ways, that's what gets me excited. And I think that it's not like I'm trying to subject myself to a life of service, but I'm just trying to kind of reiterate the fact that, like, defining your purpose and why you do what you do is important. And I'm constantly redefining that. And I think that when I do present my work, or I present these stories, I'm really looking for kernels of truth. I'm looking for someone to walk away with something important, right? Whether that was, what I learned sitting on the jail cell sitting on the floor of a Russian jail, or what I learned by like flooding $30,000 with a camera gear when I was just starting out, or what I learned by like burning a best friend from some licensing deal. Like, I've had some lessons, and I'm not ashamed to say that, like, I've made some really bummer mistakes. And I think that also through that, the beauty is like, I also like am excited to give people a bit of that. And I think that's kind of what it comes down to, is like, when there is that genuine excitement, there is that genuine knowing. And also too, I think what it comes down to, because everything you're saying kind of like ties all back together, is that idea of self-worth. Like, once you've gotten to that place of like, well, I know who I am, and I know why I do what I do, and I know why I operate. And I'm okay with my failures, and I'm okay with my imperfections, and I fully acknowledge those. To me, or for me, only at that point can I get on stage, or can I give somebody advice, knowing that, like, this is the best I have to offer. And love it or hate it, but that's what I am. Like,
no, it shows, man. It's just been a real pleasure getting to know you, and it's super inspiring and instructive, and it's again, selfishly, it's improved my life greatly, and so I imagine there are millions of people that say the same. All right, we crammed this interview in a very tight schedule, and so what do you have next that you can talk about? What's up on the docket?
Yeah, I got something up my sleeve I think you will be stoked on. So I did this, right now I'm trying to sell a feature film. It's not in, it's in the same vein as everything else I've done, where I've tried to take a meaningful relationship or a meaningful story, and I will set it against the background of like nature or expedition or something like that. And bring it to the masses in a way that they can consume it, right?
Sure.
Because for better or worse, maybe less than 1% of the world can relate to like fat biking across Iceland in the winter. Yeah. But a good portion of the world can relate to, addiction and abuse and being lonely and dealing with COVID and things of that nature. So I did this expedition with two very close friends in the winter of last year, and I came back, and we had this amazing life-changing expedition. We all grew as people. We didn't even know we were growing. That's how much we were growing, right? We were bonding, and then we came back, and one of them got stuck in Mexico and had to basically, during COVID, couldn't get home for weeks on end. And we're all celebrating and, kissing our kids and whatever. And he's just down there fighting this addiction. And it was brutal. I mean, it's a tough story. And I've been working on a script with a really talented team. And we're trying to sell this through, and it's going to be hopefully a feature-length film that parallels his struggles as somebody who's trying to come to terms with his addiction, whilst on this expedition. We don't know about that, and then they kind of come to a head. And so it's a film about that. It's called the working title is Here I Am.
Nice.
And it's really cool. It's going to have all those classic elements of adventure and everything. Other than that. In the immediate future, I'm going to Salt Lake City tonight to do a little skiing, and then Colorado, and then back to Iceland. And I've got another expedition planned in Iceland this summer. I mean, mainly because I have an apartment there, and I'm there part time, so it's easy jumping off point, and it's a place I love. It's a place that's rich in history, and the people are amazing. But other than that, I'm actually working towards making one more book in the next couple years here, which would be more of an instructional, kind of like the the sort of like the Derek Zoolander guide to photography, how to take photos good and learn how to do other stuff good too. Just really informal. If you're Chris Burkard and you're out in the middle of nowhere and you barely have the right equipment, how do you make it work, right? And I like practical guides. I like the stuff that you keep in your back pocket and it's got notes in it, and you're like, you know what, I'm going to bring this with me. So I want to make something like that. And I think, if anything, spending more time with my kids and trying to be the best dad I can. And yeah, man, it's cool. Do you?
A few things. Yeah, you got a few things going on.
Yeah, just a couple things.
Well, man, I really appreciate it. It's always just a real pleasure to speak with you. And I know how busy you are, or I have a general idea of how busy you are. And the fact that you take time to chat means the world. And I love the book. Love everything you do. Love how you do it. And that's sincere. I'm not blowing smoke. It's been great getting to know you, and
Same, man.
Good luck. And I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, brother. I appreciate you so much, and you're still my wife's podcast crush. So
nice.
Yeah, keep it going. You've scored some points in that department for sure. For me,
That's awesome.
Me too. So yeah,
Awesome.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way, so head to mountainprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.